Hi there. Let's talk about childhood trauma. Unhealed trauma can keep you stuck and hidden. It keeps you in a constant state of low-level threat, otherwise known as hypervigilance or survival mode. It will never allow you to truly thrive or enjoy your life, let alone step into your purpose. It suppresses your gifts and keeps your talents at bay, and it even prevents your manifestation. This is how we end up as hidden seekers, constantly searching for the thing that will help us get unstuck. So it would make sense that you want to know that if you have experienced complex trauma, or if you have those unhealed wounds that are holding you back. That's why I created this video for you. We're going to be utilizing the test from the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. But just know that trauma can be tricky. There are certain key experiences that clearly qualify as being traumatic, and then there are experiences that may not necessarily qualify as being traumatizing, right? But they can still create the same effect on the brain and the body. So let's cover the known traumatic experiences that clearly indicate trauma, childhood trauma, and then we will cover the less talked about experiences. They can have the same potential to hold you back from experiencing a life that you love because they have the same impact on your brain and body. So according to the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the more difficult your childhood, the higher your ACE score is likely to be, and the higher your risk for health problems later in life, both mental and physical. If your ACE score is between 1 and 3, you have intermediate risk. If your ACE score is at 4 or above, you are considered high risk for toxic stress physiology. And there are 10 adverse childhood experiences that are measured by physical, sexual, or verbal abuse, physical or emotional neglect or violence, separation or divorce, family with mental illness, family with addiction to drugs or alcohol, family in prison, or witnessing a parent being abused. So pause the video, rewind if you have to, but go through those and check which did you experience and what is your score. Don't be disheartened. They used to think that the brain couldn't change and that once you experience those things, that was your permanent state in life. But we know because of neuroplasticity, there is hope. Through somatic healing, you can heal, and I will get into some of the details on that in just a minute. But we want to look at now those other experiences, those other behaviors, those other indicators of trauma that may or may not seem like it was a traumatic experience in childhood. So complex trauma can happen even in seemingly normal situations. It's important to remember that it's up to how you perceived your experience, and that will tell us how it impacted you, right? What was considered normal at one time is no longer acceptable. So just because they used to be able to leave 3 to 5-year-olds home alone in other countries about a generation ago, that is no longer acceptable. So be careful to not normalize these things that impacted you in a significant way. Be careful not to discredit your experience. If you did not feel safe, seen, heard, cared for, or loved for an extended period of time, it is likely then that you experienced the same changes in the brain and the body that are consistent with trauma. Of course, things like physical or emotional abuse seem obviously triggering and traumatic. But what we don't realize is that having our experience of our feelings invalidated can be just as damaging. Even if it was just a perceived experience and not intentional, we should not infer criticism or humiliation or rejection because of it. And still at the same time, we know that the brain and the body experience changes because of emotional violence or physical violence just as much as being invalidated or emotional abuse. Simple everyday occurrences like moving houses or witnessing a natural disaster or just suffering from an illness can also create lasting effects similar to trauma, again, on both the brain and the body. We are interconnected. We are all one, so it cannot be separate. So here are a few questions to ask yourself to dig deeper into your experience. Did you have, or do you have, strong, emotional, persistent reactions to things that are triggering you? Do memories still carry significant emotional charge? Do you tear up when you tell the story of your childhood? Do you experience intense, frequent fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, emotional numbness even? Oftentimes people will come to me and they say, I don't feel anything at all. I just feel numb. The numbness is also an indicator of trauma. When you're triggered, do you feel hijacked by your experience? Do you feel like your brain is offline? You can't find your words. You stumble over the things you want to say, and somehow your mind just goes blank. If you do experience something like that, does it take you down for an extended period of time? Do you feel like you just want to recoil and hide and isolate and crawl under your blanket and maybe stay there for days or weeks or months? Do you feel exhausted, never fully re-energized after triggering events? Do you experience reoccurring nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, rumination, excessive thoughts around a certain situation? Do you experience flashbacks? This one was a tricky one for me because I thought a flashback meant I would see, a war zone and a picture in my head. But emotional flashbacks and somatic flashbacks are equally as important as visual flashbacks. They can look like an exaggerated response to a stimuli. Somatic flashbacks can feel like an anxiety attack. It can be a fast heartbeat or a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, flushed cheeks or clenching of your muscles, your jaw, your shoulder, your throat tension, right? One way to determine if we're having emotional flashback or any kind of flashback is to ask, would most people respond to this situation in this way? Or am I having an exaggerated response? Is my response appropriate to the situation? And of course, this requires a certain level of honesty, because that part of us that is hurting is going to want to say, oh, yes, of course, I should respond this way. But if you were to put this situation into someone else's shoes, would they still respond the same way? Do you have difficulty forming or maintaining relationships? And this is intimately connected with that emotional response, because if we're not able to regulate our emotions, we're not able to have appropriate levels of distress tolerance, we will struggle with relationships. Childhood or complex trauma can erode your ability to trust people, to express your emotions, to establish healthy boundaries, and just to have healthy relationships in general. Do you struggle with self-esteem or self-worth issues? Trauma can contribute to low self-esteem and a negative self-image. We have a tendency to take on the voice of our abuser, and so we beat ourselves up as if we are going to somehow get ahead of the pain that we know is very likely going to come from the other people around us. At least that's what the trauma brain assumes, right? Do you engage in self-destructive behaviors like substance abuse, self-harm, or risky behaviors? It may even be as simple as struggling to eat healthy or an addiction to sugar, things that are seemingly normal, but you know they're not good for you. You don't really want to do it, but you do it anyways. These behaviors can be coping mechanisms. They are necessary when we have unhealed wounds and trauma because we can't tolerate our current state of being. So there has to be some sort of outlet. Do you experience emotional symptoms of mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, or disassociation? These things are almost seemingly normal in our society today because they are so pervasive. But depression and anxiety, they're not genetic issues. They are not passed down. Trauma is passed down. And depression and anxiety and disassociation are the repercussions of our unhealed society. Do you experience physical problems that might be linked to things such as chronic stress, chronic fatigue, digestive issues, or even autoimmune disorders? Again, the body keeps the score. Do you have difficulty with work or performance issues? Do you struggle with keeping up with the daily challenges in relationship or work? Do you struggle with memory issues? Do you have ADHD-like symptoms? You struggle with focusing or staying on task or staying on time? All of these can be a result of unhealed trauma. Do you have difficulty recalling significant parts of your childhood? This one would be pretty obvious, right? If we have memory gaps related to specific events in our life, that tells us the brain doesn't want to see that anymore. It doesn't want to go there. It's too painful. And these are just a few of the issues that can be experiences that we will experience as a result of unhealed trauma. So if you have said yes to 3 or more of these symptoms, you will want to look into somatic healing therapies like trauma spotting. This is what saved my life. For years, I was stuck in my head, struggling with depression and anxiety, unaware of why I kept struggling with the same traumatic, painful loops of unhealthy partners and damaging coping mechanisms and difficulty with coworkers or domineering bosses. I had a tendency of just drawing these things into my life over and over and over, these repeating patterns. Even though I became conscious of my inner environment and I tried all of the hypnosis and affirmations and meditations and mindfulness, all the things to try to heal that, even talk therapy. But talk therapy alone was not enough because my unhealed trauma was housed in the body. And that's why somatic healing therapies are necessary. Somatic means of the body. The body keeps the score. The trauma lives in the body. So I kept attracting those experiences to help me see where the healing needed to happen. And when I finally learned that I have to work with the body to heal and release this trauma, that is when my life changed. That's when I finally began to create a life that I love, not just enjoyed, but actually loved, a life worth living. This was the missing piece that I couldn't seem to find. In all of those years of seeking, I finally found it. Because when you live in unhealed trauma, you are just surviving and you'll never truly thrive. Life is tolerated, not enjoyed. And you continue to get what you tolerate when life could really, in reality, be so much better than it is. But when you live your life, the best life possible, you give yourself permission and you give others the permission around you to do the same. The more you heal, the more you elevate the others too. The more people that step into their purpose and help alleviate the suffering on earth, the better place this will be for all of us. So as Oprah says, when you know better, you do better. So if you're just realizing that you might have unhealed trauma or complex trauma, this is the moment when you get to finally begin and create a new shift, a new life for yourself. So the choice is yours. Will you continue to live in survival, or are you ready to finally thrive? If you're ready to heal and leverage the natural healing abilities of the body through trauma spotting, book a call with the link below and we'll get trauma spotting right away. I'll talk to you soon. Sending love, my friends.